Hi, everyone. Welcome to Potluck Food Talks. Today, we're going to talk about rice.
Rice.
So, what's the deal with rice, Phil?
What is the deal with rice, man? Why is it everywhere? Why does every culture eat rice? That makes no sense. As if rice was this one crop that grows all around the world. I don't believe it. There's been a rice conspiracy for years. Who brings the rice to all these people? You know, it's literally everywhere. They eat rice in Scandinavia. They eat rice. We all know Asians who eat rice. We all know, people in Latin and South America eat rice. How does the rice get to Germany?
I actually don't know. I have no idea.
It's a mystery.
I guess it's bought from rice-producing countries, I guess.
You would think so, yeah.
What can we say about rice? In Latin America, it's super common to have like a lot of just plain white rice with anything. Like it's one of the staple foods. And you will see things like meats. You would usually see like in a pasta, like ragus and these kind of things in Europe. You would see them with rice in Latin America. Quite common.
Latin America, obviously rice is staple food. Asia, of course, we don't have to talk about Asia, It's like...
But I mean, if we talk about Asia, there are really different types of rice, like the ones you will see in India or Japan or China are completely different universes in its own.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, rice is not rice, the different varieties of rice are so extremely different, from the steamed jasmine rice in China to the rice in Japan, the more short grain rice, is a completely different thing. It's a completely different flavor also. People don't often focus on just the flavor of plain rice, but it's completely different.
Oh, absolutely. Like a basmati, you will see this aroma that reminds of popcorns that you will also find like in jasmine rice and not so commonly in other types of rice. And then you have like this round, also glutinous rice you find in Central Europe, like in Spain or Italy, like a bomba rice or the rice you use for risotto like arborio or carnaroli that are also completely different thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like what the rice is supposed to do is also very different, like whether the rice is supposed to be completely loose and flaky, like in a biryani, or whether the rice is supposed to be a little bit sticky, like in Thailand, where they have the sticky rice, that they eat with every meal, where you get like a little box with steamed sticky rice. And then, Japan also. And there's it's very interesting when you focus on something so simple as rice. It tells you a lot about the preference of sort of like aroma but also texture that people like. So for example, if you take the example of Japan, this like little bit mushy, kind of soft, chewy texture that like you often get in the steamed short grain rice. There, it's like, it's a preference that people have, with like mochi and all these other sort of like things. And it's really, something so staple and so fundamental for food culture really tells you a lot about the food culture itself.
No, absolutely. Also, it's interesting to see when rice is eaten plain, just white rice, but also when it's mixed with ingredients. In some cases, the ingredients are kind of like stewed inside, like in this arroces you find in Spain or paellas, or you can have like this rice sticky soups like the congis you find in Asia. Or you have like these rices that are mixed with ingredients, but not cooked together, like this stir-fried woks with rice, right? So there's also like a completely different ways of eating it, even if we don't get to the universe of rice pasta, rice flours, and all these kind of things that are also like a universe in its own.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, even sort of like Central Europe, here in Germany, one of the most traditional desserts around the whole country is Milchreis, which is basically like a rice pudding, short grain rice that's cooked in milk with spices, and eaten like a dessert.
It's interesting because that's also one of the most common desserts here in Spain and also in many countries in Latin America. So I wonder where it originally comes from, but I could expect this being a very ancient dessert.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's probably one of those, like you say, like the super ancient dishes, probably from like Persia or something, that it came over, with the Arabs. For me, it was really cool to see like it's the same dish, but in different versions. For example, like rice pudding in England, right, is usually baked. So it's kind of the same dish, but it's baked. While in Germany, it's kind of like cooked, but often, like I grew up eating rice pudding cold, but usually it's eaten warm with like glazed cherries on top. But then when I went to Spain and I ate arroz con leche, milk rice, it was more like a soup, it was like a cold dessert soup. And I don't know whether that was just because of the person making it, but like, I thought it was really particular. Also seasoning it with, cinnamon and lemon zest. For me, it was like leche merengada kind of style. For me, it was like really like, wow, this is something that I know, but it's like with such a simple change, it's like a completely different dish. And that was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, here you will find it like, as you said, like more like a liquid soup or more sticky. It depends. So I just Googled the origins, and so it's very hard to say where it comes from because it's consumed in many countries in Europe and also in Latin America. But it's believed to have started during the Moor invasion in Spain, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Because, rice and cinnamon probably is something that started in India and some way it transformed during the way to Europe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and there's so many things that got brought with, with the East coming into the West, right? It's crazy. I mean, if you look at Spanish food culture, I feel like there's very few things where you say like, oh, this hasn't been influenced by Muslim culture,
Yeah, absolutely.
The ingredients that got brought with it,
What about the whole grain rice? Do you consume it?
Yeah, not as much as I would like to. But when I was in Japan, in Japan, they have these really beautiful rice dishes. Obviously, they have lots of different rice dishes, but just these like simple donabes. For people who don't know, a donabe is basically like a clay pot, very thick walled clay pot that's usually used for cooking rice. And there, obviously in Japan, they have many types of like varieties of rice, and they have certain varieties that are not as polished. So they're like a little bit more rustic, but they make these like in a donabe, often while you're cooking the rice, you'll add sort of like seasonal ingredients that just kind of steam together with the rice. And then once you open the lid, you have the ingredients kind of laying on top. And then you kind of like mix the rice at a table before serving it. And I saw a lot of dishes with that using sort of like whole grain rice. And it was super nice because it was like really like a little bit more countryside style, really rustic and really wholesome, hearty, while white rice is not really like, it's not unhealthy, but it's also not like as healthy as people necessarily think, sort of like, but like, if you leave a little bit of the whole grain on, it's like a completely different thing. And that was super nice.
Speaking of whole grain rice in Japan, I usually eat whole grain rice at home once in a while. And just recently, just because I felt like it, I had this sushi rice pre-made seasoning bottle, and I just added to the whole grain rice. It just made sense for what I wanted to eat. And it actually worked pretty well, rice with rice seasoning. So it worked pretty well. And I was wondering if there are like traditional Japanese dishes that use it like this, or if it's something that is not usually done.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely, it's not always about white rice. And especially in Japan, I saw it a lot. I also saw people, adding barley or buckwheat to the rice and sort of like just cooking that all together. So you have like little bits of like cooked barley in between your rice, which makes the whole thing more nutty and like just more wholesome, more healthy, more nutritious. And that's definitely a thing. But, I also have seen a couple of sushi chefs using rice that's not completely white and polished. And that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. That, yeah, cool. Good to know, because it completely made sense to me that, if you have like a super good whole grain rice, why not doing sushi with it?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things to make at home, which I probably don't know how to make properly, but is also one of my favorite things to eat, is biryani. Have you made biryani before?
No. What is it exactly?
So biryani is an Indian dish that's basically a layered dish of rice and usually sort of like meat and spices. And you'll kind of like pre-cook rice a little bit. And depending on what you what you want to add. You know, maybe you have like some mutton or some goat and you kind of like pre-cook that a little bit with onions and loads of spices, like a lot of sort of like, you know, nice garam masala. And then you add layers in a pot, sort of like rice, meat, rice. Sometimes I think they also put like dal inside of the biryani, but I'm not super sure. And you kind of layer it and then you bake the whole thing. You finish the cooking there. So everything gets kind of perfumed. And then, you know, this is a very typical dish for weddings. They make these, I don't know if you've ever seen these YouTube videos of like Indian chefs making these enormous biryani pots for like 200 people.
No.
Oh, you have to watch them. It's crazy. Just Google sort of like Indian wedding biryani. And it's like, it's amazing, you know, because it's just sort of like, it's like a celebratory dish, but it's just very nice and wholesome, you know, sort of like everything cooks together, gets perfumed. It's like fluffy rice, spices, because then also the rice gets kind of streaky. You know, some parts of the rice are more clean, white rice. And then some parts are like really yellow from the saffron and the cumin, how do you call it? Kurkuma.
Ah, fuck.
Turmeric.
Turmeric, yes.
From the turmeric. And yeah, it's just very nice. You know, it's kind of like, especially when, you know, when you have people over, you just put a big pot over, you know, you can seal it with a little bit of bread and kind of like break it open it. It's super fragrant, but it's also just very wholesome.
What kind of rices do you usually have at home?
At home, I always have basmati rice at home.
Me too.
And what I always try to have at home is a nice round grain rice for like Japanese style rice.
Exactly. I have like also Japanese and basmati. Those are my most common rices.
It's kind of hard for me to find like a nice Japanese rice. Like nowadays it's like much easier, but it used to be a little bit more difficult. And I remember I had a Japanese friend here in Germany. This is already like quite a few years ago. Now there's more products available. But she was telling me that she was like, oh, you know, when I came to Germany, I was trying to find like good like sushi rice. Not necessarily for sushi, but just like the rice that they use, you know, round grain rice. And she was like, and I found that in the supermarket, the rice that you guys sell for Milchreis, for rice pudding, is exactly the rice that we use as like normal eating rice. So like this very sticky round grain rice.
Yeah, which is interesting because it's probably so much cheaper with that label, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you can get really premium. Like I was in an Asian supermarket the other day and they had like from like the really cheap sushi rice for like, you know, 20 kilos for like 10 euros to like packets of like 200 grams of rice for like 30 euros, you know, like just like premium stuff. I don't know how much of that is marketing. I know, you know, from having been in Japan also that like rice can get super, super nice. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have the expertise of cooking rice like that well that I think it would make that much of a difference, you know?
That's it for this week's episode of Potluck Food Talks. If you like what we're doing, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok as Potluck Food Talks. The show airs every Monday.